Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't sing, but the angels do. You know what I mean? And so it's like, if the angels can do it, why can't you? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so
the
it's
rocks
like,
cry out in worship.
Yeah, exactly. We've been given more of a reason to worship because God didn't die for the angels. You know what I mean? He died for us. You know, He died to save us. And so we have double the reason to worship, you know?
So good.
And even if it doesn't sound as good as what the angels are, as good as what the angels are doing and what how they're singing and what they're doing up there, it means the same. You know, even though it's not maybe as good quality, the heart behind it makes it different in its own way.
Grateful to have you guys on the podcast today. And, in the same way that when, a lot of churches talk about missions, they bring out the missions pastor. Zach was like, hey, let's talk about worship. And so who else should we bring on than the worship pastors here at Pure Heart? So
that's how it goes.
Yeah.
We're in a worship series. That's the only time the worship pastor gets
let's drag out the worship pastors.
So
what do you got to say? But no, I mean, I think it'd be a really good conversation to have, just beyond just, a lot of times we get kind of boxed into just what worship is, but really like why we do it, I think is always an ongoing thing, because when we know the why, it ends up unifying and directing us into walking into like a weekend service or whatever. A lot of times you're going, so what's the point of this, especially if you're new and everything. So, talking around that, I think, is a great place to start and kind of informing our people in our community. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I hear a lot of times, especially working with just students who are really starting to make their faith their own for the first time, is they'll talk to me, well, we don't go deep enough in worship, or I like worshiping by myself, but I don't really like worshiping with other people. Like I can do it the way that I like at my house. And I think there's this beautiful idea that, the Bible talks about whatever you do, whether you're eating or drinking, do it for the glory of God. We can worship wherever we go, but there's something really special that happens when we come together as a church family and we worship together. And we've talked about this a lot. But Paul writes, hey, don't neglect meeting together. Let it encourage you. And so I think there's something really special that when we walk in on a Sunday morning or on a Saturday night or to a worship night or whatever it may be, and we're surrounded by other people, it doesn't matter the kind of week that you've come in with, you can be encouraged seeing everyone around you lifting up their hands and worshiping together. You can be encouraged by the person who's sitting next to you, and maybe they're not worshiping, but you look over and, hey, they're praying, they're having a moment privately with God, even in a room full of people. I think it's just really special when we come together, and I think it can be easy to let those moments pass us by,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I think we tend to just forget about how important it actually is to meet with each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of become commonplace in today's society to do, you don't have to go to the corporate church anymore. You don't have to go to a place. Like you just do church at your house.
Absolutely,
home church is great. And in some ways, like, man, I actually have a community that I do home church with. And so I see why that's important. But you can't get away from what the local church actually does for the community.
Yes.
And I think being a part of a corporate gathering is just part of that. It's just part of going to a local church, and you kind of like touched on a little bit how some people have their preferences in worship. You're always going to have that, whatever, but it's just a matter of go to a place where glory is being given back to the Father.
Yeah.
That's really just what it is. If that's a home church for you, that's what it means for you. If that's a corporate, local community, that's what it is for you. But as long as you're just engaging in corporate worship with people around you and like-minded worship where you're giving all honor and glory back to the Father, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And I've really felt, we've talked around this as a team and everything ad nauseum. Like a lot is just the whole idea of, worship is supposed to be everything that we do. It's, it's not just the songs and everything, but there is something very special and unique about corporate singing.
Yeah.
And because there's a lot of things like, how symbolic and the feeling that you get when you do communion, because it's echoing with generations and generations of people who have been exercising the same element and in how they interact with God. Corporate singing in worship and adoration of God is probably the only thing that I can think of that doesn't just echo generationally, it echoes through eternity. Because for all time, for all of eternity, that act has been happening
Yeah.
and will continue to happen. It's probably the only thing I can think of that actually it's when you hit a tuning fork and then it just buzzes and it hums and then it echoes and other things pick up that frequency. That corporate singing element is like that. It's like you hit a tuning fork and it's echoing and buzzing eternity.
Yeah.
In that it's connecting you with all of that in a
beautiful.
unique way that almost nothing else does.
Yeah.
But it's not the entirety of what worship is.
Right.
But it's
a part of it.
I'll tell you what, there's a reason why you feel the way that you do
Yeah.
when you jump in that way.
When I think Michael from Peoria, I think it was him that was talking about it. It's the only thing that you're gonna do when you leave this world. You know what I mean?
right.
When you get into eternity,
Yeah.
your worship is the only thing you're taking with you. You're no longer going to be giving. You're no longer going to be offering these different areas, like having a financial offering.
Yeah.
It's not going to matter anymore.
Or evangelizing.
You're not going to be evangelizing anymore. And so it's just going to be worship. That's all. That's what we're going to take with us when we're actually moving into eternity. And so it's something we get to take part of here. That's been going on for eternity, like you've been saying, and it will, continue to move on.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the people who maybe come into this space and it's awkward or it's uncomfortable for them to come in and corporately, like even singing. I think for people who don't naturally gear towards the arts, like singing in front of people can be super uncomfortable, or lifting their hands. And the Bible talks about like worship is a sacrifice. I think there's a level of it that would be uncomfortable, but I'd love to hear, because both of you guys have been leading worship for quite some time. What would you say to the person who's uncomfortable still coming in and corporately worshiping and kind of standing in the back or sitting and just kind of waiting for it to be over?
I mean, I would say from my end of it, because you lovingly said both of you guys have been doing this for a long time, which basically just means we're older.
No, more experience than me is what I'm saying.
So as the oldest one in these seats, I know for me, a lot of time, personality plays such a huge part in it, because for one person, two new people could walk into a church with no experience or background, but one person's personality might be completely okay with that. But something else will make them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The length, for some people, it's the length of sitting in a chair makes them uncomfortable, or hearing someone talk. It's like, okay, I stopped listening about 20 minutes ago, that type of thing. But the uniqueness of the singing, I think, is the vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because you can listen to a message, you can do other elements of it, and not necessarily be vulnerable in that moment, because there's a level of participation. And so I think you actually have to if someone's coming in and they're feeling it, I would encourage you going, what you're probably struggling with right now is that vulnerability of it. And that's okay. But once you identify that and understand that, I think it helps you know how you can step in. Before that, you're just, I'm uncomfortable. I don't know why. I don't like it. That you naturally default in that order.
Yes, there's vulnerability with it. I think another thing is the judgment that they could probably experience from the people around them, because not everybody is musical, not everybody. And we live in I feel like that's part of culture. If you're a good singer, if you're a good musician, you've had, I don't want to say like respect or favor across like all of time, like if you were good in some art form, like, man, you were thought highly of, and if you don't have that ability, then people are kind of like, oh, like I'm not one of those people, like I'm not that good in this area. But I think if you have a desire for like the actual heart posture of worship and the sacrifice behind it, it doesn't matter what it sounds like. And I think that's where like you start to get comfortable in that environment. Is like, oh, it doesn't matter what it sounds like. What matters is the sacrifice that I'm offering back.
That's so good.
And so it's not so much of a, hey, I want this to sound so good, for my neighbor next to me, that's not what we're after. You know what I mean?
After, you're welcome.
Yeah. It's like that in some ways. Yeah, you do. Like we all want it to sound as good as possible, but for the what we do on the stage sounds terrible compared to what the angels are giving him in heaven, And so it's just a matter of making sure what we're doing in that moment is worthy of, what he's called us to do. And so I think that's a big one. I also think the way that, and I'm actually guilty of this myself, the way that people perceive the arts I don't want to say everybody, but the way that some people perceive the arts is just kind of like, oh, that's just a fun thing that people do, you know? And I'm actually guilty of this. I'm not good at painting. I'm not good at most creative art forms. I'm not good at it. Even musically, I would say that I'm not a very creative person musically, but I feel like I have a responsibility to, if I've been given this ability and been given the ability to do this from a stage, looking the way that I do and having that mindset where I was like, I don't know about the arts, but I have this, I can just kind of be helpful to people that also experience that and be like, hey, he can be up there and be very vulnerable doing this, like in front of people. And like, they need to know that they can also do that. You know, it's okay to come into this room and come into this, you know, auditorium, whatever it is, a sanctuary, and let loose, because this isn't generally an art form anymore. This is an act of worship that we're giving back, you know? And so it's just a matter of, it's going to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. It still feels uncomfortable to me, like getting up there on a stage, not because I'm not really nervous to get up there most of the time, but it's just like, man, this is music. I'm singing into a microphone in front of people. This feels, this is not me, you know, like
worship karaoke.
It's just not what I'm into. But also, as soon as you just set your heart right and be like, listen, I'm not here to sing and for people to hear me, you know, I'm here because this is what's required of me to do this, you know, and to be a part of, you know, a corporate body and
leading and inviting people into it, you know, and which takes, I mean, it's a responsibility in a way, but sometimes we'll lean more on the talent side of that responsibility. We live in we're an American Idol generation of people that, you know, everything is judged, you know, everything, and it's like, and critiqued, and we see the guy who gets up there and you're like, that guy can't sing, and he's just confident and proud, and you're like, and it's you mock it, you know, that's how we've been trained to do it, and so then we hold ourselves to that same scrutiny.
Yeah, level. And I think people walk in with that, like they don't want to be scrutinized in that way, and so they walk in and they don't want to be like judged by the person next to them because they don't sing as well, or you know, whatever it may be. They don't want that judgment, and so they're gonna worship in their own way, and they're gonna say things like, "Oh, well, I don't sing." It's like
they disqualify themselves.
Yeah. It's like, well, I don't sing, but the angels do. You know what I mean? And so it's like, if the angels can do it, why can't you? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so
the
it's
rocks
like,
cry out worship.
Exactly. We've been given more of a reason to worship because God didn't die for the angels. Right. You know what I mean? He died for us. You know, He died to save us, and so we have double the reason to worship. You know,
so good.
And even if it doesn't sound as good as what the angels are doing and how they're singing and what they're doing up there, it means the same. You know, even though it's not as maybe as good quality, the heart behind it makes it different in its own way.
Yeah, agreed.
That's so good.
There's that C.S. Lewis quote that the band was actually named after, you know, just the whole thing of going, our gift and our worship and our gifts to God and everything are equated to in the same way of, say, a little girl crawling into her dad's lap and asking for 6 pence to go buy him a present, and going, now only a fool would think that the dad is now 6 pence the richer on that transaction because he was given something or whatever. He's the one who gave and everything, but there is an act of love and of adoration and connection that happens in that way. Yeah. He's not going, dude, this is worthless. I gave you this, so you're just giving it back to me. There is a transactional, relational element that happens that's endearing, that God craves. But I think there's also another part. You brought up, read the whole thing about the glory of God. You know, He's deserving of our worship, because He's worthy of it. And I think there's a nuance there that I think we miss in this, is that we miss that the honoring and the worship, whether in song or any of these things, we tend to see it a lot more in song, is something that is directed to and should be directed to God, even though we get to reflect it. And Paul talks about the benefit that we get, you know, going, hey, encourage each other with these songs. Because there is a unity side of corporate gathering and worship. You're pulling people together, unifying them, which is weird that actually everything we talked about was ways that we are actually creating division. We're scared of the division in that moment. Yeah. But actually the nature of it is to pull people together.
To pull people together for His glory. Yeah.
But then the other side of that is going, we're actually reflecting glory back to the only being in the universe that can actually contain it and hold it.
Right.
Because none of us were ever intended, we're not built to be able to contain and hold glory, because it's like radiation. sun coming off, radiation coming off the sun, anything that tries to hold it other than the sun itself mutates. It warps. And Lucifer's fall, who was the person responsible for leading the singing, the worship.
Yep.
His job was to reflect it back to the being that could hold it. When he held it himself, he mutated, he warped. It caused something because he was never intended to hold it.
Yeah.
In the same way, I think sometimes in leading worship or in these things of going, no, or we're putting more emphasis on our ability to hold and contain these things instead of simply going, we are only here to reflect it.
Yep.
So I think both of those sides are things that we have to be thinking through and being okay with, or else we can take the singing portion of worship and that corporate gathering and make it something that it's completely not.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to one of our other worship leaders, Tina, this week, actually, just about that idea of holding reverence for the Lord in worship and how a lot of generations will kind of pendulum back and forth. And it's interesting because Pastor Dan this week was talking similarly to some of our leaders about this idea of the pendulum swing. But we have created so much intimacy and friendship and community with God and the Holy Spirit in this generation. And I think it's so beautiful. But with that pendulum swing, I think we've lost a little bit of the reverence. But what's been really cool is I think I've seen hints of it coming back with the worship songs that are coming out, even like A Holy Forever, No One Like the Lord, all of these songs that are really just doing exactly that, pointing the glory towards God, exalting his name. We're getting less and less of those worship songs that are about, I feel this, I feel that. And there's nothing wrong with those songs. They have a place, but I think it's really interesting how we can kind of pendulum swing and lose some of that reverence. And I think we're finally getting to a point, at least in worship culture, from what I can see, where we're starting to get that balance of holding it, of the community aspect, of revering God, of giving him the honor and the glory. It's just been cool to see. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, the two sides of the more testimonial versus the more exalting.
Yeah.
It's I definitely lean more exalting in a corporate setting.
Yeah.
But man, when it's me and my wife worshiping at home, it's way more testimonial. It's
So
what are we going through in the moment that we need to turn over, that we need to, hey, this is what we feel in the moment. And so we're going to worship like this at home.
Yes.
We're going to pepper in those hey, we're, obviously holy, worthy is he. We believe that in the moment, but also this is what we're going through, and this is what we're grateful that he's brought us through, and this is what we're grateful that he's doing in our life currently. We're grateful for the things that he hasn't done yet,
right.
And so we're more testimonial at home, but in a corporate, community setting, it's it's just all glory back, all adoration back. And so I fall in both camps at different times, and it's just a matter. It's sometimes it's good to bring in the more testimonial stuff into a corporate setting because you can see somebody working through that.
Sometimes people, they need to hear that on a Sunday morning.
Because that might be their only, because if you think about it, if all they heard, if we're talking about the way my family does it, if we didn't do it at home and all we heard was the, holy is he, worthy is he, that's all we heard. And we didn't have the setting, at home, the more testimonial stuff, the more living in the moment, then we wouldn't really know why he's holy.
Yeah.
We wouldn't know why he's worthy unless we're diving into that. Whereas a lot of people that come into worship on a weekend basis, they don't have that at home. They may not have that ability to, jump into a worship set with their spouse and, kind of and see what that feels like and see what that, where they can get on a personal level with Jesus. All they see it is at a community or as a corporate setting. And so you need to be able to incorporate that in weekends so people can be like, oh, this is why worship is important. It's because he's deserving of it, but also it's what he has done and what he will do.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so powerful about that passage in Revelation when it talks about how people overcame the enemy. And it's by the blood of the Lamb, who he was, who he is, the word of our testimony, and that they didn't live their lives even unto death. The sacrifice, those
so good, Heath.
Three things are on. They're said in the same breath. Which you think about that, going, my testimony is said in the same breath as the blood of the Lamb. Going,
wow.
But it's power of God working through you, and you proclaiming that it does something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's some compartmentalization that sometimes we separate those things.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is and it's been happening. I mean, when Jesus was walking on the earth, there was still the separation of sacred and secular, or flesh and and this is holy, this isn't holy, that type of thing. And I think the mentality and the spiritual understanding of believers of going, once you understand that everything is holy, like everything is sacred to a believer, to you, the things that you do. My dad was such a great representation of this, and is a great representation of this. I mean, the amount of times where he would walk into a room and sit down and just take a breath and just go, "Thank you, God," or he'd be doing something, he'd be working on something, hammering something in the backyard, and just go, "Love you, Jesus," and wow. And I'm like, those aren't the thoughts that are going through my head in those moments, because I designated them for a different space.
Yeah.
But what that spoke to me was going, every moment is an opportunity to worship and is worship. But when we separate that out in our heads and this is when we do this, and this is in this space we only do holy, in this space we only do testimony, in this or whatever it's going, we've compartmentalized it and forgotten that all of it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's so easy to do. You guys were teasing me about this beforehand, because you're talking about, are we going to talk about Greek words? But I actually did want to bring up
the Greek word, words. No.
My one Greek word that I know that I can't say right, proskuneo, which it's the Greek word that's used the most in the Bible to talk about worship, and it creates this picture. It literally means like toward kiss. So you're like laying face down, kissing the feet of the Lord, kissing the grounds, like just full surrender and worship. And what I love about that word and how it describes worship is that it's a posture. And I think you can do a posture in whatever you do, whether it's doing the dishes or going to work or walking your dog or parenting your kids. And it might feel uncomfortable at first. Like if you've ever tried to fix your posture, I have horrible posture. So like I'll constantly be like, oh my gosh, shoulders back. And like,
I've done
don't
3
slouch.
times in this. I'm like,
yeah, it's like, okay, I'm like slouching again. But once you get into the habit, it's like you don't even realize it. And suddenly you're walking in that posture. And I love how your dad would just come in. Thank you, Lord. God, I praise you. And how it sounds like that was just habit for him. Like he had just got so used to walking in that posture. Yeah. It's so cool. I want to be more like that.
It's practicing the presence of God.
Yeah.
It was just put him in the room.
Yeah.
Wherever you're at,
How do I give God honor in the things that I'm doing? How do I walk out of a Sunday and not stop worshiping?
Yeah. It's one of those, like, even though, as worship pastors, you feel like you should kind of have a lock on some of this information, and then it's like you don't understand it at all. Like you're just scraping the surface. And like that's something as we're talking about that, I think I've shared it with you both a little bit, but like going through the stuff with my voice recently. And, we say it all the time from stage. It's like worship is not music. Worship is not this. Worship is the act, whatever. And then realizing like, with my voice coming in and out like it's doing, and, maybe not potentially being around for a little bit longer. So it's just like, what does my worship look like? And it's like, well, it's what I've been telling people it looks like, you know what I mean? It's just like, you have to like tell yourself over and over again. And so that was something I realized is like, worship is how I'm loving my spouse. Yeah. Worship is me like investing and taking time in my kids, and taking time, spending time with my kids and going out to lunch with them and praying over them in the moment. That's worship. You know what I mean? Right. And so it's like everything you do, as long as it's in agreement with God and it's sacrificing your life and it's everything that's around you that you're just giving it back, that's worship, and it was just like, we just get used to saying it. This, it's like worship is not music, whatever. And it's just like, as soon as something is taken away from you to where now you have to use something that's not music to actually worship. It's like, you get it, and then you can like, you convey that to others, and be like, this really is what worship looks like. This is a completely different thing than I'm used to.
I just want to call out the fact that, yes, we joked around about it earlier. I have been doing this for many years now. I'm pushing against it as much as I possibly can, but it's like I've been doing this for 30 years now and everything. I feel I know less now than when I started.
Yeah.
In my understanding, my comprehension, what I'm able to grasp, and what the potential of what God wants to teach in this. And I've become more acutely aware of the fact of going, to remind myself to be careful what I say that I know is absolute, and everything, because there's so much more that God wants to unpack.
Right.
But I also want to say, you talked about your, this, what you're walking through, because again, you start experiencing things and you're like, oh wow, no, I've been saying this, but this is real. In my heart, I need to commend you on the fact of seeing how you've been walking this out. It's probably been some of the most powerful leadership that I've seen anyone do.
Yeah.
And I think I am privileged, and I'm not just saying this, to be able to walk with incredible leaders. Again, like I've been doing this for 30 years, but seeing you guys as worship pastors on the team and the leadership that you pour into, you do it with such just transparency and just the reality and that vulnerability we talked about at the very beginning. You guys do that so well, and I'm really, really grateful for it. Mm-hmm. And thank you for all that you pour into this on a regular basis, because I think sometimes, say a lot of times in your own home, you're not, maybe as seen as much or respected as much or whatever. I think you guys are highly respected. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm like, I wonder if people actually know what they have in you, because both of you are amazing. And I'm so grateful that you lead in this space and that I get the opportunity to walk with you guys as you are unpacking more and more about what we're called to do as believers. So thank you.
Thank you, Heath. That was so nice.
Sorry, that was unexpected, and I got really emotional there.
Oh,
for
my
a second,
goodness.
So.
Grateful for you. Grateful to be on this team. Really.
I think that's all we have for today, folks.
We're supposed to invite you to Fifth Sunday.
That's right. I'm like, there's something else there.
We're supposed to do this. Please go to Fifth Sunday.
That's not all we got.
One of the things that we do that I think it encapsulates, that's the reason why we do them. Fifth Sundays aren't just like, we need some time where we can just do more songs and give more people a chance to sing. Like that. Yeah, that's part of the fun side of doing it. But the reason why we do Fifth Sunday is that pulling together of that unity.
Yeah.
That's one of the main purposes for why we do that across all the campuses and everything and pulling them in. So we've got our central campus, we've got the Peoria campus, which is PHC Peoria and PHC Espanol. And then we also have our next gen, which is young adults, youth, junior high, like across the board. So when is it again?
March 30th.
I know, but I'm asking.
March 30th, fifth Sunday of the month.
Yep.
Yeah.
But this one,
6:30.
if I can, I think it's 6:30. If I can kind of explain a little bit of what's going to happen that night, is that cool?
Tell us.
So something we do here at Pure Heart, we've kind of incorporated this recently, is on weekend services during Saturdays, like right before our rehearsals and stuff, we've started taking some time before we actually jump into rehearsal and readying ourselves for that weekend and making sure everything's lined up correctly and like all the transitions are seamless, whatever it may be. Before we jump into anything logistical, we're going to sit down and we're going to center ourselves. We're going to like spend some time in prayer and reflection, and we're going to worship together as a team. We're going to pray over each other. We're going to pray over that room. And so we've been doing that for a little bit recently. I know some of our other like campuses, I know Peoria has been doing that for a while.
Yeah.
And then I know HYA has been doing that for a while as well. And so, but we recently picked it up here, is at Glendale here on weekends and stuff. And so what we're going to do, I was talking with the team a little bit about this earlier this week. We're going to kind of make our fifth Sunday that. Wow. And so what it's going to be is we're going to get together and we're going to like preface it, by saying, yes, this is a worship night. We want to corporately worship together. But also what we're trying to do here is we're trying to center ourselves so that this room is ready and you're ready to bring more people here. And to bring more people here and ready to engage in worship and give honor back to the Father. And so it's kind of like just a whole prayer and worship night that's going to be centering on, yes, we want to give glory back, but also we want to make sure we're in the right place in order to go out into our communities and into our families and stuff. Good. That way we can be charged up and ready to do that. And so it's going to kind of we're kind of taking what we've been doing on weekends and putting it in a corporate setting.
That's really cool.
And so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun too. We've the last last maybe 3 Fifth Sundays, we've started combining with Next Gen. So we have students joining us. And this time I'm really excited because she's actually here in the room, but Chloe, who's our worship intern, she's helping run point for this worship night. And so it's going to be really incredible. We're pulling in young leaders. And so it's just going to be really fun to see that intergenerational, whether you're young or you're old or you're new to church or you've been going for years, this is a space that we can just come and, just like you were saying, ready our hearts and worship the Lord and just be in community with each other.
Yeah, you see, we've seen on our team specifically how important it is to like actually spend some time readying ourselves. And if it's that valuable to the team that does it regularly, how much more valuable can it be to those that show up that don't get to experience that, you know,
That's
and
good.
don't get to be a part of that. And so it'd be cool. I think we're gonna have a good time.
That's
really
awesome.
good.
March 30th, 6:30 at our Glendale campus in the 700 building. People have been asking, is there childcare? Unfortunately, we don't have the volunteer team in order, but bring your kids in.
Bring your kids.
Like
bring
it's
the
a
babies.
family. It's a family affair. Like bring it all in and be involved in corporate worship. I think it's going to be really good. And we've experienced these and they have been good. I think they're going to continue to get better and grow as we continue to do them. So it'll be a good time. So I encourage you to come out. And that is all for today. And unless there's another announcement that I missed. So, but no, we're good. So handing it back off to Zach Good.
Thank you so much again for listening to the Pure Heart Church podcast. We had a great time making this episode, and we're going to have some great episodes coming up, so stay tuned. Every Tuesday, we have an episode coming out, and we want this to be a great tool for discipleship for you and your family. So make sure you're staying tuned with everything that's going on here at Pure Heart Church, and keep watching the podcast. Comment, like, share with your friends. We're having a great time making it. We hope you enjoy listening to it just as much. So we'll talk to you next Tuesday.